Okay, we are going to get started then. Thanks, everybody. It's great to see so many faces here. Welcome to TNC TV, Nature in Your Backyard. Thanks, everybody, for participating in this. As I mentioned just a minute ago, everybody's muted. It's great to see everybody's faces, but as soon as we kick off, if you could turn off your camera and then turn it back on at the end, that'll help with internet and focus and all that good stuff. So thanks everyone. I'm going to turn it over just a second here. I want to tell you who our host is for tonight. If you don't know who our host is, he's fantastic. It's Matt Williams, who is not just TNC's Director of Conservation in Indiana, but he's the author of this really amazing book, Endangered and Disappearing Birds of the Midwest. And it's just it's a glorious feat it's a treasure for the eyes, but also a lot of knowledge for your brain and a lot of warmth for your heart. And if you haven't checked that out, it is available on Amazon. It's just a little plug-in for you, Matt. I know you weren't expecting that, but I couldn't help it because it is such a good book. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt. He's going to get us going. Thanks, Matt.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Melissa, and welcome, everybody. Welcome to this first event for us. This is a brand new format, something we've never tried before. So I hope you'll be patient with us, depending on how things go. I was talking to a coworker today, and I said, you know, no matter if everything goes perfectly or if it completely goes off the rails and implodes, it'll still be entertaining TV for everybody and kind of a win for the audience either way. So why are we doing this now? And we wanted to do something tonight that would help with everything going on in our world. We just thought it would be appreciated to have a break and a respite from everything that's going on around us and be able to focus on a subject that all of us enjoy, and that's the birds of our backyard. So as we're staying at home, we have this amazing thing in our backyard, these beautiful birds, and whether your backyard is 20 acres of woods out in the country or a concrete patio in the city, either way you have birds, beautiful birds to look at around you. So we thought this would be a fun topic for tonight, and I'm joined tonight by three fantastic speakers who are going to give some short presentations for us. We're going to have a presentation that's going to be about feeding your backyard birds, and then we'll have a speaker talk about how you can landscape your yard with native plants to attract more birds. And then we'll wrap things up with our speakers with a presentation about bird song and how to help us identify birds by their songs. So I think whether you are a real crazy fanatic birder who's got a life list and state lists for all kinds of states and does a lot of traveling, or if you're just somebody who enjoys looking at the birds out your window, I think we've got something for all of you tonight, and I hope you all enjoy it. So with that as a quick introduction, I'm going to pass the microphone over here to Jim Carpenter. Jim is our first guest, and you may know Jim. He's the founder and CEO of Wild Birds Unlimited. It's a franchise with 350 bird feeding supply stores across North America. And Jim is also the author of The Joy of Bird Feeding, which is a relatively new book. It's an essential guide to attracting and feeding our backyard birds. Jim's also a board member for the Nature Conservancy in Indiana, and it's just fantastic to have him here. We really appreciate his time. So Jim, without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you for your presentation.
All right, can you hear me?
We can.
All righty, so great. Well, Matt, thanks so much for inviting me to be on your panel tonight, and look forward to talking to everybody. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we will have some time for questions at the end. I'm going to share my screen. We'll try to move through. I've got some slides, hopefully some things to think about when you're feeding the birds. Maybe you already knew, or maybe you hadn't thought about before, but let me try the screen share here and see what we can do. And there we go. Can you see that? Can you see my screen?
We can, John.
All right, great. So I wanted to show this slide just because I kind of get a little crazy. It's only a few of my usual 20 feeders I have going in my backyard. I feed off the deck a lot, so we get raccoons. This is a raccoon-proof setup with the 2 poles and the raccoon baffles, and so I can feed without worrying about that. But it's kind of fun to show you this picture too. We're going to talk in a little while about our barred owls that are nesting right now, and mama's on the eggs. I'm going to circle this. If you see my little arrow, there's the barred owl nesting box in the middle of winter. Nobody uses it. Well, the squirrel does in the winter and gets chased out when it's time for the barred owls to come in. But anyway, I like to do feeders, a lot of different kinds of feeders. I like to put them together, try different ways of attracting. But the main thing is, a lot of different heights, different areas in your yard, things that have hoppers, things that are trays. And everybody needs trays. I can never have enough trays. So you can see 3 trays in this picture here, kind of a regular big one, a little side dish, and one under the tube. And then here's another way to do it. There's a hopper in the center here, a tray on the side, a tray on the top. And you can see you've got the pileated woodpecker, chickadee. Oops, cowbird snuck in there. It must be about this time of year, as you can see in the picture. But we'll talk about some spreadable suet you can put on the side of a feeder. So anyway, it's just my point is to try to have as many different varieties of food and feeders as you can. Well, I want to start out talking about the food because that's really what the birds are coming in your yard for. And I just titled this, Offer Blends That Birds Actually Eat. Believe it or not, about 50% of the bird food sold out there has most of the food in it the birds don't actually eat. And I'll show you that in a second here. But mostly what they eat is sunflower seed, safflower seed, a little bit of millet, and sometimes a little bit of cracked corn, but not too much cracked corn, and sometimes fruit. This time of year, you can also find a seasonal blend, perhaps, that has a little bit of calcium, which helps with egg laying and building back strong bones for this time of year. And all these foods are also usually available in a cylinder form, which is really very convenient and lasts a long time. Well, here's the food that with milo, wheat, and oats, and it usually ends up on the ground. And I really bring this up for one thing, you're going to enjoy bird feeding more if you don't buy blends like this. But being a Nature Conservancy presentation, it's really important to think about land use. And literally tens of thousands of acres of agricultural land go into producing milo and wheat and oats that ends up rotting on the ground under bird feeders. So it's a real waste of our resources and agricultural lands. Suet is another thing, which is fats is really important all year long, but especially in the winter to get a lot of really high caloric per bite, I guess you would say. But you can also make a choice in buying fat products that don't have grains in them, because the grain is really not what the woodpecker and the nuthatches and the other suet eaters are after. Go for suet products that have a lot of peanuts in them. If you have any choices at all, should have a lot of peanuts and very little grain. Except you will see some grain in it when you talk about the no melts. And the no melts are going to have some cornmeal in it, and that's the way we make the suet products so they don't melt in the sun. The birds readily eat it, and it's highly digestible, but it's still got to have a lot of suet product in it, and want to look for protein products like peanuts. And these are also available in cylinder products as well. Another product, and I've got to mention it because it's named Jim's Birdacious Bark Butter. It's a spreadable suet product that it's really cool. You can put it anywhere. You don't even need a feeder. You just put it on tree branches, and you can put it anywhere. And you can see on the right, lower right, the little oranger in color, those are, that has hot pepper in it. And so this is the food that actually attracts more birds than any others in the world. And you can see a whole variety of birds, brown creepers, Townsend's warbler on the bottom left. And of course, here's cardinal eating a suet product. Who knew? And on occasion, we've seen cedar waxwings, Clark's nutcrackers, Keller Ryan, and even the scarlet tanager will come into this. So it's a really great way to diversify your food and to put food where you don't normally have it. Hot pepper is a new thing, and just about any product can be found in a hot pepper. And basically, the birds love it. We actually, John Shout's coming up. We spent literally 20 years researching the hot pepper and do the birds like it? Is it safe? And actually, it turns out the birds love it, and it is safe. They do not perceive the hot pepper like humans do, but they seem to love the hot pepper. Don't forget mealworms as another way for insect eaters, and also the fruit and nectar coming up season here real soon. I'm just going to talk briefly about a couple things. I talk about the 12 elements of a thoughtful bird feeding station. Just going to highlight a couple here. Foundational feeder. One of the things that everybody needs to start with is have a feeder that doesn't run out of food. And that may sound obvious, but it's not to everyone. You don't want to fill your feeders every day. So get a feeder that holds at least 4 or 5 days of food. And then you can fill in with all the other little trays and nectar and things that need to be refilled more often. Here's something that I've really discovered, not a new discovery, so to speak, but I observed it. And I really promote perching branches. And when you put out as many branches as you can, you will double or triple the number of birds you see at any one time. So you get double or triple the birds for every bird feeding dollar that you put out there in food. And here's a shot out in Colorado with the lazuli buntings and the black-headed grosbeak, and then the American goldfinches coming in. And you can see on this picture on the left how many goldfinches are on the branches. There's 2 or 3 times as many as on the feeder. And this little fake tree I made on the right, you can't see it, but it has about 4 different species of birds on it waiting to come into the feeders. You can tie or a branch right below a feeder. It gives you great views, in this case, the mountain chickadees. And on the right, I just took a big old forest-grown maple tree out of our woods, and I tied it up next to our deck, and this is where all the woodpeckers land before they come in to the feeders. You get a lot of interaction between the birds. Another thing, which is kind of similar, but I call it vertical landing spots. Obviously for woodpeckers, these are just a natural, and you can combine it with food, such as the bark butter. This is just a slab of bark I've got up on a pole, and the birds come in, land on it, and they just love it. And then almost every time, even if they're going to another feeder, they come and land on this vertical landing surface, and then they go to the other feeders, if it's a suet, cage, or whatever. Well, this is a very exciting time of year. We're going to have all the nesting. In my yard, I've got the nesting bluebirds, nesting chickadees, the juncos, only going to be here for a couple more weeks. Hummingbirds are coming in. We've got already had an observation of one in Indianapolis, even one up in Chicago. And won't be long before we see the rose-breasted grosbeaks and the Baltimore orioles. And of course, the American goldfinch is already in their spring colors. So very exciting time of year. My barred owl box is up. There's the web site. If you want to watch Mama, she's sitting on eggs right now. There's an outside view. There's what it looks like in my backyard. Right now we have 3 eggs. Pretty soon we get to watch the babies inside the nest, the papa feeding the mama, and the babies will be out before we know it. So that's my quick little presentation, and thank you.
Well, that's great, Jim. Thank you so much for that presentation. A lot of good information there, and some great photographs too. I think my favorite was the Jim's birdaceous bark butter smeared in a smiley face on the side of the tree. That was that was fantastic. Okay, well, we're going to transition now, and we're going to have Dawn Slack talk to us. We just kind of learned some great tips for feeding birds in our backyard. We're going to kind of continue that theme a bit, but Dawn is going to talk specifically about how we can plant native plants in our yard, and that's really important for not only feeding birds, but also provides shelter for them and nesting habitat. Dawn is Director of Stewardship for the Nature Conservancy in Indiana and is responsible for overseeing all of our preserve management on our network of over 30,000 acres in the state. She also serves as the project coordinator for the statewide Indiana Invasives Initiative, which is working to have a cooperative invasive species management area for every county in Indiana. So Dawn, as you can imagine, is very busy. So appreciate you joining us tonight for your presentation, Dawn. And I think you're on mute, so if you click off mute, we'll be able to hear you.
Don't hang on. I will unmute you. Hold on 1 second. Gotta find you. Well,
Did you hear me?
yes, we can hear you now,
There
Don.
we go. Excellent.
My screen. All right, can you see my screen?
No screen yet, Don.
No screen.
can
Not
see your
sure
face,
why
though.
the screen is not sharing. All right. Well, I lost the entire thing for some reason. All right, can you see it now?
It's not up yet, but it could be just my connection too.
Well, I can't see. Is it there now?
Try it one more time, Don.
All
That works.
right. I've got it on play. Can you see it now?
Still not
Anything?
coming through. Nope, not seeing it. You're hitting the share screen button down at the bottom there?
Yes, I am. And actually, I don't have a, I cannot even get to my Zoom. All right, can you see it now?
I cannot. Oh, well, I think we're going.
Here
There
we
we
go.
go.
All right.
I see the hermit thrush coming up there. I think we're good to go.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we will get started. And for some reason, I still can't see my screen, so I'm not quite sure what's up there, but welcome everybody and thanks for joining me. And I am going to talk to you about native plants. All right. I'm having a hard time with my screen, so give me just a minute. For some reason, it is not working for me. All right, can you see that screen still?
Yes, we can.
All right. So having a feeder can be quite a bit of fun and very beneficial to the birds. But the best thing that we can do for birds, for the future of our birds, is to actually plant with native species. Because native species provide the insects for our baby birds. And our baby birds are the future. Adult birds do also eat insects, and so when we've used native plants in our landscaping, we're feeding both adult birds as well as young birds. So let's check out a few natives. If there's one thing that you can plant and only one, then we highly recommend, if you have the room, to plant an oak tree, the mighty oak. It is one of the powerhouses of native species for providing food for insects and birds. And if you've read anything about Doug Tallamy at all, who is a wonderful entomologist that studies insects, then you've read that it takes thousands of insects to feed our baby birds. And in fact, Doug Tallamy's research shows that it takes over 9,000 caterpillars to feed just one nest of chickadees. And how in the world do we get that many caterpillars in our landscapes and in our lawns? One of the best ways we can do that is to plant oaks, to plant native species, and particularly an oak tree. Because our North American oaks are host to greater than 500 species of caterpillars. And that's pretty cool. So if you can only plant one thing and you've got room for a tree, plant an oak tree. The next layer to kind of bring into your landscape is that mid-story layer. And if you are looking to replace Calvary pear, and I hope that you all are, consider a flowering dogwood which is the beautiful picture in the bottom, or a serviceberry, or and if you want to go rogue and you'd like to do perhaps go a little pink or purple or throw some splash of color in there, plant a redbud. And not only are these species simply stunning, but they provide food for native insects as well as birds. Dogwood provides berries in the late fall and winter for birds. They also are host to the spring azure, to banded hairstreak, and many more caterpillars. Redbud is a host to Henry's elfin, and serviceberry is a host to the red spotted purple caterpillar. So great species to add to your landscape. Shrubs. I can't say enough about shrubs in your landscape. They do so much work. They add beauty, wildlife, texture, and arrowwood viburnum is an amazing plant. It's got wonderful blueberries, those edgy, toothy edges on the plant, on the leaves themselves, and then it has gorgeous fall color. So they provide native berries for birds as well as food for caterpillars. And as we've said, as I mentioned earlier, those caterpillars are food for birds, especially those baby birds that need thousands just for one nest. So this arrowwood viburnum is a host to, again, the spring azure, to hummingbird moth. It attracts butterflies like red admirals and question marks, and lots of food for birds. Vines. Vines can be a little tough, and we often choose invasives in our landscape when we're finding a vine. And one of the invasives that we use a lot is called winter creeper or purple winter creeper. And this is one of our top invasive species in Indiana, actually in the Midwest. Notice the leaves on winter creeper. They're perfect. There are no tooth marks, no chew marks, and that's because they don't offer food for insects. And therefore they're kind of like, they just offer a dead landscape instead of a living landscape that we want to have if we want birds in our landscape. So if they don't offer food, they're not part of the system. But Virginia creeper is a great native plant. I will caution you, the fruit is poisonous, and it's not a plant that you want to plant next to your house or even on a small arbor. But if you want some vibrant red color and a powerhouse of a vine, Virginia creeper is a great plant to use. They feed over or support over 32 different bird species and over 16 caterpillar species. Again, it's not a plant to have next to your house, but if you've got a little wood lot in the back and you have a good sturdy place for this thing to grow, this is a beautiful plant to have. Last thing that I want to talk to you about is the ground layer, those herbs. And the species that I really love, and I live in the woodlands, but I have a little open sunny patch, and one of the best ones is columbine. This species literally dances around my feet and my knees when it's in the garden, and that's because columbine is so loved by hummingbirds, and its bloom time it coincides directly with the migration of hummingbirds. So not only does it feed and is a host to a lot of caterpillars and moths, such as the columbine dusky wing butterfly, the columbine borer moth, long-tongued bumblebees and sweat bees, but it is a wonderful plant for hummingbirds. And in my garden, you can literally walk among hummingbirds when this plant is in bloom. They are not bothered by me walking in amongst those plants. They are actively feeding. So I encourage you to incorporate this in your garden if you have a sunny area and if this plant is native to your area. It's just great. It really shows the connection between that native plant and our native wildlife, and that's extremely important that we understand that. Last, I just want to mention, and this was a lesson that I had to learn. I struggled with this, but I've learned kind of shamefully that Mother Nature knows more than I do about these old plants and about plants in general. And leaving these old stems is very, very useful. These photographs were taken just a couple of days ago. These birds, the chickadee, the pewee, are literally just ripping fibers from the old stems of echinacea that are in my yard, and they're using it to build a nest. And that means future birds. So when we use native plants in our landscape, We are absolutely enhancing living landscapes for our birds. Last, I'll leave you with a few resources. You can check out your state Native Plant Society website on indiananativeplants.org. You can also check about and learn about invasives through our nationwide website, invasive.org. And of course, you can check us out with our Midwest invasive plant site, and that's MIPIN. You can see those on the screen. And then our own Indiana, which is SICM.info. With that, I'll turn it back over.
All right, great. And Don, you can stop sharing your screen, and that will free it up for our next speaker. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was great. I really like the photos of the red buds and flowering dogwood in bloom, because it reminds me that that's just around the corner for us. I really look forward to that time of year. Okay, so now we've learned a lot about bird feeding and ways to landscape your yard with native plants. So we've got a yard full of birds, and now the challenge is how do we identify all these birds out there, and especially how do we identify all these bird songs that we're hearing in the morning? So for our last presentation, we're going to turn things over to John Schaust, and John is the Chief Naturalist for Wild Birds Unlimited. And he has 45 years of bird and bird song identification experience and is considered to be one of North America's foremost interpretive naturalists. So John, thanks so much for joining us, and I hope you can teach us how to learn how to speak bird tonight.
We'll do our best, Matt. Thank you for having me, and thanks everybody for joining us tonight. This is kind of a daunting type of a presentation when you think about it. I've got about 420 seconds to teach people how to identify all the birds that are out there that in some respects have taken me a lifetime. But I've had a lot of opportunity to work on it because I needed to. Bird songs never came easy for me, and I've been doing this a long, long time. And it's one of those things where when I started out, the resources weren't available. A lot of the tools that people have, all of us have available today, make this so much simpler. I always point to, if you're familiar with, there's a lot of young birders clubs these days. There are a lot of young kids getting into birding. They are amazing. You're talking 13, 14-year-old kids that have an ear and can identify everything they hear. So we're going to give you some of the tips. We're going to really look at two different things to help you be able to identify a bird like this in your backyard. Can you all hear that?
Yes.
Good. That is the warble of the eastern bluebird, of course. And how cool is that to be able to wake up some morning and have that call filtering in through your window and know that you have an eastern bluebird out in the backyard, even though you're not even seeing it. That's what birdsong does. It allows you to really be aware of all the different things, all the different birds that are around you. So what are we going to do and how are we going to teach it? Well, this is the first tip I would give you. And really it's two things. It's these things that we call birdsong mnemonics. And it's simply a way of putting a phrase to the bird call. And the other piece of it that we already talked a little bit about is then using those phrases while you listen to recordings of the call to help it become a permanent memory. So these mnemonics are kind of the pacing, they're kind of the tonal quality or the pacing. Probably the best way to show you and to cover it is, this is a neat little chart that somebody put together. I took it off the internet, and it has different birds, and then it's a little quiz to put the song, the mnemonic with the bird. One of the classic ones that you do a mnemonic for, that when you're trying to explain what it is this barred owl up here in the corner. And they say, it says, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" And it's very cool because listen and see if you don't pick up on that too. It's kind of a southern owl. It's got that draw on the end. Oh, but you get the pacing, you get the idea. Listening to the call, looking at the mnemonic, it really helps it sink in and help you remember. Another one of my all-time favorites, our little Carolina wrens. We have a pair here year round. They say, it says, and it's this mnemonic up here, tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. Let's see if it says that or not. So very fast pace, but again, listening to the recording, looking at the mnemonic, it really brings it home. You know, the reality is most people already know a lot of birds and mnemonics already. Classic example would be our jay. Truly doesn't get any simpler than that. We'll move on to one. Here's another one, our white-breasted nuthatch. It's pretty straightforward and simple. Yank, 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 yank. So again, combining the recording with the mnemonic really helps you learn these calls very, very quickly. One of my all-time favorites. These guys are going crazy right now. They have been for about, 3 weeks or so, ever since we turned the corner and started getting more warmer, longer days. And these titmice have just been tuned up to beat the band. You hear them everywhere. They are so loud. It says, Peter, Peter, Peter. So there you go. And last one, this is probably a little more, maybe a little more vague, if you will, but our, Northern Cardinal. What cheer, 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 cheer. Let's see if it says it. Definitely has the cheer, cheer, cheer part down. So, these aren't perfect, and that's one of the frustrations you'll find sometimes. You'll be looking at the mnemonic that somebody's created for it, and then you play the call, and it's go, well, wait a minute, that didn't sound like that at all. Sometimes you have to make up your own. I have actually made probably 2 or 3 dozen of my own just to help me remember them better than what the standard mnemonic is that's out there. So where do you find these? It's very simple. There are literally website after website. Just do a Google search for bird mnemonic list, and you'll be able to find list after list after list that'll have dozens, if not the vast majority of the common birds listed for you. So that's kind of the mnemonic side. A quick talk about mnemonics and where to find them and how to use them. What about the recordings? And boy, that's the thing that's come light years compared to when I first started up. There were no easy recordings. I think Cornell had a record that you could actually play, a long play LP record that you could play. And then cassettes came out, and Peterson Field Guide to the Bird Songs came out. But none of it was ever very convenient, and there was not much variety whatsoever. Probably the neatest thing I'm going to show you tonight is this Merlin. This is a Bird ID app that is available. It's free. It's unbelievable what this thing can do. It's done by the Cornell Lab. And when you download it, you can see this is the icon. This is from my desktop on my iPhone. And you can see I have a lot of different bird apps, but this one, really, really nice, and it's a great one to use so that you can listen to the calls and then use your mnemonics to compare it with. So if I was to click on this Merlin Bird ID, it would bring up this page. This is the home page that comes up, and this thing does 3 different things really cool. If you have no idea what the bird is, you click on this one and you have a series of questions: size, color, habitat, location, and you punch those things in. You just select from a pre-existing chart and you hit submit, and it's pretty amazing. It does identify a large percentage of the birds that you're trying to put in there. So that's very cool. You can identify birds with it. If you have a photo of an ID, you see a bird in a magazine, you don't know what it is, or you actually get a photo yourself of the bird, you can input the photo right here and it will identify the bird for you. How cool is that? Where we're going is the Explore Birds tab. So if I was to punch on the Explore Bird tab, this is going to come up. This first page right here is what's going to come up, and it's a whole listing. It's pretty much, it's very comprehensive, pretty much all the birds in North America, although you can actually dial in into just your region, but it's available, all the birds of North America. And so bottom line is, I'm going to say, let's go see what an indigo bunting looks and sounds like. So I click on the indigo bunting, and bingo, this is what comes up. And it's just it's a ID info, basically tells me what to look for, that type of thing. And if I was to click on the map down here, this is what would come up. It's a range map, tells me when the bird's here. Obviously, I can tell it's here in the summertime, but it's down in Costa Rica and Central America in the wintertime. Then if I wanted to, I would click on the sound button down below, and that's going to bring up a panel that has indigo bunting, and it's going to have the songs, calls, and flight calls. And when I punch the song, it's going to start playing the song of an indigo bunting. One of the cool things about it is it has this little sonogram that is almost like a visual mnemonic. It shows you the pacing and the rhythm, the volume. You know, is it a low, soft, or is it really high? So it's kind of, it takes a little getting used to, but once you do, it's also a big assist on helping you to learn your bird calls. All right. So with that, we'll take that last indigo bunting, and here is that mnemonic that they always talk about that, and that's fire, fire, where, here, and let's see if it says it. That's probably the toughest one of the night that I've shown you. But it really does do the pacing. And the more you practice with it and the more you listen to it, it really is something that you will train your ear to hear that in your own backyard. So that's my 420 seconds worth of primer on how to bird by ear and learn your bird calls. So thank you very much.
Fantastic, John. Thank you. And a huge thank you to all of our presenters tonight. I really enjoyed that. I hope that you all out there did as well. And we purposely held questions for this part of the evening. We wanted to get through each of our presenters first and then open it up to questions. I hope people have been putting those into the chat box. And people can go ahead and turn their cameras back on. Melissa or Chip, do we have any questions that have come in that we want to share with one of our presenters and get some answers to?
Hey, Matt, this is Chip. Yes, we do.
All right.
So I'm going to start with a question for Jim. It is, I don't have space for a lot of feeders due to apartment living. How do I maximize my feeder space to get birds?
Well, that is a really good question. And actually, we do have some experience with that. I have a daughter living in an apartment now. And so what I worked with her on, two things you're going to worry about in an apartment. One is you don't want it to make a lot of mess that your neighbors don't like. And that goes for condo living and anywhere where people live pretty tightly. And so you do not want a mess. You don't, it's just a thoughtful thing to do. So any of the no mess foods is probably the way to go. And don't put out a lot at one time. So you can use a little tray, and they come in all forms, in which basically the birds are going to eat it all that day. And if you use the no mess foods, which is sunflowers without their shells, peanuts, those would be the two main ones to use, but also some of the suet products, like the little bark butter bits, comes in little balls the size of peas. They're going to be eaten by the end of the day, and there's really no mess on the ground. Nothing gets in anybody else's yard. So you can do it on balconies. Just make sure that there's no mess that falls below you and the neighbors below. But there's a lot of ways to go.
Great, thank you. Jim, I think the next question is for you also. One of our viewers says, I had success with finch feeders until some hawks moved into the neighborhood. Should I give up on the finch feeders?
Well, hawks, probably talking about the Cooper's hawk, which has had a really large increase in numbers in the last 20 or 30 years. And they definitely have learned that birds gather at bird feeders, and they do come in and sometimes take a bird. So the best thing you can do is just stop feeding for a few days, sometimes a week, and the hawk will, unless they're living right in that neighborhood, they'll stop coming by, or at least it'll be a few more weeks before they pay another visit. They're gonna stop coming back. But if it's really a problem, you just have to stop for a little while. The other thing you can do is to put your feeders 10 feet away from your house, or exceedingly close, maybe a foot or 2 feet away from your house, because that 3 to 10 foot is what we call the danger zone, where when a hawk flies by and the birds panic, 3 to 10 feet is where the birds panic. Normally they know your house is there, but when they panic, that's when they tend to hit the house, and that's when the hawk can pick them up. But if the feeder's 10 feet away, the birds won't hit the house and the hawk won't get them. And if it's within 3 feet, they may hit the house, but they don't injure themselves because they're not going fast enough.
Excellent, thank you. Well, Jim, since you're on a roll, the next question is for you. It says, do you recommend shaded areas for feeding stations or direct sunlight stations, a mixture of the two? What?
I use them all, and so I don't think it really matters at all. Whatever, I like to put feeders where I can see them outside my window, or if you're out on your deck a lot, where it's convenient to fill them, considering, you know, if it's winter and there's snow. But I like to put feeders where I can see them. And but in the summertime, the hummingbird nectar, you can imagine, the hotter it is, the more rapidly you need to change it. Imagine yourself, would you want to drink a Coke that's been sitting out there for a couple of days? Well, the hummingbirds don't either, and it's going to get even nastier if it's in the sun. So clean the hummingbird feeders every 2 to 3 days, literally, and then use a no-melt suet in the summer if it's in the sun.
Great. Thank you. I assume this question is for Jim, but maybe Matt, I'm not sure. It says, how did birds change from the chestnut oak, which was the predominant tree in North America, to the oak today?
I'm not an expert on that one, and Dawn may know if she studied Tallamy, who I've really enjoyed getting to read his work. Doug Tallamy. If anybody, you know, Dawn was talking about Doug Tallamy. Look him up on in Amazon and buy his books. But he really has been the one to study that. And I don't know about the transition, but as Dawn said, there's 500 or 600 native insects that lay their eggs and they create larvae on all the different oak species. And so we can only imagine that they did make the transition well. Would you agree, Dawn, on that? Okay.
I do, yes, absolutely.
All right. All right. This is a question I was actually thinking about the other day because I had a bird fly into my picture window. And the person asks, how effective are the window alert UV decals at preventing bird impacts?
I'm going to let John do that. He's our chief naturalist.
John?
Let me get unmuted there. Yeah, you know, there's so many different products out there, and if they're not used properly, in other words, and applied properly, they vary widely in their effectiveness. There are some of the products out there that work really well. The biggest mistake people typically make is not put enough on. You know, a lot of the different products are made to be really fairly close together, whether it's I've used the tape that you run a series of tape lines, UV tape along your window. Those are supposed to be between 2 and 4 inches apart. So you're gonna have a lot of pieces of tape running across your window. I've tried another product that's UV, but they're little dots and they come in on a tape, and when you put it on the window, you scrape over it and it applies all the little dots on your window, which is very cool, very effective. But again, those are within 2 inches. Those rows of dots are within 2 inches of each other. So I think the products, depending on which ones, are actually very effective, but they have to be applied properly and according to directions. And that's the big shortcoming that I've seen over the years that people don't do.
All righty. Thank you, John. Jim, we're coming back to you, and this person asks, Jim, I use the no mess blend. The sparrows flip it out onto the ground. Is there anything I can do to deter this?
Well, I wonder if the sparrows are kicking out the peanuts. It's not their favorite compared to the sunflower seeds that are in it. And I don't know. Sparrows are sparrows, and if they're coming into the feeder, I assume we're talking about house sparrows, which can come in fair number. And so that's where I would just try different foods. Try safflower. The sparrows might eat it, but they may not eat it as much as the no mess. But the cardinals and the chickadees and titmice will still eat the safflower. But then you've got a shell, but not a bad shell. It's a little white shell. But I would just try a different variety, and that's really the best thing to do is just try different things until you see what happens.
Thank you, Jim. And another question for you. Is there a way to discourage starlings from eating my suet? Starlings.
Well, we have a lot of conversations about starlings, and there's been a solution around for 30, 40 years called the upside down suet cage. And so that is basically a suet feeder where the only access is on the bottom, and woodpeckers will hang upside down and starlings will only briefly, but that doesn't deter them completely. The other way is to put a suet cage inside what we call, it's like another cage, which has 2-inch mesh holes in it, and your downies can go in, but not the big woodpeckers, but the starlings can't get in. So we're talking exclusion, talking feeder design, and there is one new feeder out that the weight of the starling can be created so that it closes up the covering over the suet, and then only a smaller woodpecker would get to it. But there are a few solutions. John, are you thinking of any I didn't mention?
Yeah, just straight suet, as opposed to a lot of the suet
Yeah.
cakes we sell and other people sell have a lot of other ingredients in them, peanuts and various other sunflower chips and all kinds of things. That's actually what the starlings really like. So if you just put straight suet cake out with none of those actual added ingredients, they're not as big fans of that, and the woodpeckers will still come to that. So it's not the perfect solution, but it does discourage them a little bit more than anything else.
All right, thank you both. Here's a question that I've seen asked previously. I feed the birds in the wintertime, but then tend not to feed them in the summer. Is that practice okay?
Yeah, either one of us can answer that. When I started in late 70s, early 80s, it was very typical that people didn't feed in the summer. 2 reasons. One, people felt like, well, I'm kind of giving a handout in the winter, they need it, and they don't need it in the summer. 2, bird food was really only available in garden centers and hardware because they had empty shelves when it wasn't fertilizer and pesticide season. So that's when they were carrying bird food to fill up the same shelves. So, and I came out of the garden industry, so I know how that works. And but when we started feeding the birds in the summer in the 1980s, what we found is it's really cool and it's really interesting. And then studies have shown since then that when birds are fed in the winter and into the springtime, and during nesting, that they're actually able to raise more babies per nest for several reasons. They were assuming, and it would include less time away from the nest looking for food, more nutrients and more just carbs and proteins in their diet that they can feed. Well, the parents are more hardy. There's a lot of joy to be had in watching the families come into your feeders in the summer. So John, do you have any other?
No, I absolutely, there is no downside for the birds. There is no downside to doing it. So, so much of bird feeding is just for our own joy and enjoyment. And boy, you are missing out in the summertime if you don't feed birds, because think of the goldfinches now. We're just now getting these gorgeous yellow, lemon yellow goldfinches. They've molted into their breeding plumage, and you're going to stop feeding them now? I don't think so. Woodpeckers, one of my favorite things as we get into July is you get all the juvenile woodpeckers starting to show up at your suet feeders, and the parents bring them to your suet feeders, and they're clumsy and awkward, and it's just a whole neat thing to watch the activity at your feeders. Young bluebirds, we get the bluebirds, and the parents bring the bluebirds. So just to see that family interaction and see those youngsters, to miss out on all that, no way.
And of course the hummingbirds. And actually, I just remind me the question about the apartment. Hummingbirds are obvious, a very easy thing to feed in any size space. And so Orioles are going to be coming in, really exciting. It's funny, Indiana Orioles only come to feeders mostly for a couple of weeks. While it's the Michigan Orioles that are migrating through Indiana that come to our feeders. And then the Orioles that stay in Indiana don't come to our feeders. So if you Hoosiers who get Orioles in July, I want to hear about it, because mostly mine go to Michigan and don't come to the feeders.
All right. I will never not feed woodpeckers. I love to see them at the feeder. All right. The next question is one that reminds me of a meeting that we had at the Nature Conservancy's building downtown. We had a cardinal just pecking at a window nonstop during a meeting, and someone asks, "It's crazy cardinal time. He keeps attacking his reflection all day, every day. Nothing seems to help. Do you have any ideas?"
Yeah, John?
Okay. Yeah, this is unfortunately something that happens all too often. And it's simply a matter of the fact that you get a cardinal that sees its reflections. It's typically a male, but sometimes a female. But they see the reflection in the window and they think it's another male encroaching on their territory, and they're going to beat them up and chase them out. And they, unfortunately, never get chased away. So they just keep coming back and chasing them and beating on them. And it gets very annoying. It really does. I've had this happen. I actually ran Holiday Park in the Nature Center there for many, many years. And we had a bird feeding window there. Many of you may have been to. And the bottom line is we had one that just was pecking away at it. So what you have to do, the number one thing is to break up that reflection or deny them to the ability to get close to the window to beat on it. How do you do that? Whatever it takes to stop reflections, whether it's taking some type of a covering, whether it's just covering up that window for a short time, whether it's taking some soap or something and soaping over the window, whatever it might be, to make sure that the cardinal can no longer see its own reflection. The other thing you might do, if it's the type of window, is put a temporary screen over it. Because that'll keep the cardinal from being able to smack up against the window. You may have to do more than one window, because sometimes when they've hit the one window that they've been coming to for the last 3 weeks and you cover it up, they find another window. So, but those are the things that you have to do if you're really going to stop that bird from attacking its reflection in the windows.
Great. Thank you, John. And I don't know if people noticed, but Dawn Slack put a website in the chat room, birdsavers.com. It's a great place for window treatments to keep birds safe, referring to birds flying into windows. Jim, we had a question offline that the person asks. He says, "I planted non-native crabapple trees in our lawn a few years ago prior to becoming interested in native landscaping. Do any birds eat these crab apples, or are they just too huge?"
I think they peck at them. They don't swallow them whole. But I think they do peck at them. You get some fruit-eating birds like the mockingbirds and catbirds who will come in and peck at them. So I think there's some value. We have a crabapple tree in my yard, and I do see it get some action. I don't really get to see who does it, but I know it gets some action.
Great, thank you. Another question, it says, "I have a bluebird pair finally at my bluebird house. However, sparrows won't leave them alone. Any ideas how to keep the bluebirds around?"
John's a bluebird expert.
There you go. Yeah, this is one of those tough things. There's really, the bluebirds have not already established a nest, and what we're talking about here is the house sparrows keep trying to occupy the nest box. Really, the one thing, you just have to be very diligent and keep pulling the nest out. Of course, all our native birds are protected. You're not allowed to mess with their nests, their eggs, or any harm, bring any harm to them whatsoever. But house sparrows are a non-native bird. 170 years ago is when they were brought here, but the bottom line is they outcompete quite often our bluebirds. So it is a tough battle. There is no barrier that I know of. Some people, if you look online, you'll see different types of nest boxes that are been produced or are engineered to keep house sparrows or discourage house sparrows. We have tested a lot of those. I know some people say they're very effective. Most of them we've not found to be terribly effective. There's another thing called the halo, which was a bunch of fishing wire, a line that was hung around. That's the house sparrows don't particularly, or were thought not to particularly like. And so again, some people Some people swear by them. Again, we've tested those products out and have not found them to be very reliable. But my point is, you should go online. There's 2 really great websites about bluebirds, the North American Bluebird Society and the website called Cialis.org. And both of those websites have more information than you could ever possibly want to use about discouraging house sparrows and that type of thing. But it is a tough battle. The number one thing, I was the naturalist at Potato Creek State Park back in the 80s, and I put in a 76-box bluebird trail back in those days. And the reality is the park up there is surrounded on all 4 sides by county roads with farms and homes on the other side of the county road. If you put a bluebird box within sight of one of those homes, you can almost guarantee you're going to get a house sparrow. If you took that box and moved it out of sight of that house, you did not get house sparrows. They don't like to travel that far away from structures. So, you know, not many of us have that kind of space in our backyards, but that is the ultimate. If you do, that is the ultimate cure to house sparrows, is spacing that box way away from any kind of structure.
Hey, John, I've got a question on that. You've heard of double boxing, where you put up 2 bluebird boxes, maybe about 15 yards apart.
Yeah.
Or maybe if you let the house sparrow have one, then they will let the bluebird have the other. Does that ever work?
You know, it works with tree swallows. That's absolutely a definite way to keep if you've got tree swallows in your area. Tree swallows will outcompete bluebirds also. So the common cure there is to put, just like you're describing, Jim, is put 2 boxes that close together. A tree swallow will take one, will not let another tree swallow nest in the other one, but will let a bluebird. They play nice with bluebirds, and they'll let the bluebird have the other box. House sparrows don't play nice. It's just the bottom line. They don't play nice. And so I'm not saying never, but the odds aren't as good as the results you're going to get, like against a tree swallow.
All right, I think we have time for just one more question. Other questions will be answered offline. Someone did write in, so I don't know if people are checking the chat, but someone asked good choices for shade-tolerant shrubs for wildlife. And in the chat box, Don Slack has put in some great shade-tolerant shrubs, so check those out. The last question is actually a 2-parter. The first part is something I've always wanted to know, and this question actually applies to woodpeckers. And is it pileated or is it pileated woodpecker? And then the second part of that question is, do you have any suggestions for stopping woodpeckers from attacking the wood column supporting his decks? He does have suet feeders, which they also enjoy, but they still attack the wood columns.
Hey, Jim,
Pileated or pileated?
I'll take the pileated pileated if you take the keeping the woodpeckers off the deck.
Oh, yeah, give me the easy one.
Now, bottom line is, you always hear that question, and it really is kind of a regional differences in the pronunciation, and both of them actually are correct. It really just your own preference. If you like pileated or pileated, it really doesn't matter. They're both considered to be correct.
I just call them pileated.
Hedge your bets.
Okay, there's a couple things. Yeah, actually, I know someone who had a lot of columns around their house, and they actually had luck for about 2 years, and then they didn't. But they bought these little fake plastic woodpeckers and stuck them up on the side of that, and it was other little woodpeckers, and then that kept woodpeckers like the downies from destroying their columns. And their columns were like made out of, like some kind of easy to mess with stucco and whatever. So they were really getting destroyed, but that seemed to work. And then I heard a couple years later it didn't. So I don't know about that. But I tell you what, my favorite woodpecker deterrent for either your house, or I guess it could work on a column, it's this thing called the Attack Spider. And it actually has a battery in it, and it has a sound detector, and you put it up on a string up under your eaves where the woodpeckers, and we get the pileated pounding on our house and making holes, and that when they pound in the house, this little tack spider, it's about 8 inches across, hears this sound, and it goes, rah, 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 and it scares the woodpecker off your house, and then it pulls itself back up and waits for the next woodpecker. It's called the attack spider. I recommend it.
Thank
But
you.
another thing I will say, like John said, put screens over the windows for the pecking birds. You can also loosely hang screens from under your eave down along areas that the woodpeckers are going after. Buy a roll of just, you know, of a metal screen and tack it up and lay it down, and that'll keep the woodpeckers from getting to that. If it's a particular area on your house, you can do that. Hopefully it's not a second or third story.
Great. Thank you. All right, I think that does it for the Q&A portion.
That's it. Thanks, everybody. I've got a quick poll. If you could just take a second and answer how you would rate. Are you seeing the poll?
Yeah.
Okay. How would you rate the program today? And then also, we're going to try this again in a couple of weeks. And I'd be curious for your thoughts on what we should do. What topic would you like to hear?
Yeah, Melissa, I'm not sure this is working right.
I would agree. It's the poll is not letting me answer.
Well, okay. Well, let's see. Oh, let's relaunch. Let's try this again. Relaunch. Continue. Are you seeing it now?
There we
Okay,
go.
here comes some activity. Woo!
There
we
There we go.
Oh, I can see the results. Woo, this is fun. Okay, I think everybody's had a chance to vote, right? Looks like it's starting to slow down. I'm going to share the results with you then so you all can see what our next topic will be on. And we'll share the results with you. Everybody loved this. Hooray. And the next topic is exactly what I wanted to talk about. Hooray again. It's pollinators. Woo, which goes along great because we've got a big pollinator campaign that we're launching in May, June at Nature Conservancy. A wonderful page Chip has been working on with Philip about Midwest pollinators. So we've got a lot of really great information. It goes perfectly as a follow-up to Backyard Birds. So please join us for the next edition of TNC TV about pollinators on Thursday, April 23rd at 7 p.m. Meantime, we'll send you all the questions and resources as a follow-up to this. And thank you very much for joining in. Good night.